Today we're focusing on the bright side of life by talking about everything that's going to go wrong. What is risk? It's actually a really good question because risk is defined differently in different disciplines, and we're going to use a very specific definition of risk for personal finance. In fact, it's a definition that's a slightly different than the definition for finance itself. In order to define risk, we need to go back to what do you want? What are those goals? Once we identify those goals, we can then come up with a list of what would impede those goals or prevent you from achieving your goals. On top of this, there are these things that impede your goals potentially, but you don't know everything. Some of these things may occur and impede your goals, and some of them may not occur. So where does that leave us? Well, if you don't know for sure, we can still do something about this. And this is where risk falls, that we want to achieve certain things. There are other things that impede us, these impediments, that prevent us from achieving what we want, but many of those things are unknowns. We don't fully understand them. They could happen or they could not happen, and then these are risks. And so what can we do about risks? Risks endanger in achieving our goals. There are 4 methods. In the 4 primary methods of risk management, I've included a link to an article that goes through them briefly. The first one is avoidance. Just avoid the risk or try and prevent it from occurring. The second is mitigation, is that if this thing happens that would prevent us from achieving our goals, we're going to make it less bad so it doesn't impede us from achieving our goals. The third is transfer, which we will discuss later on. Then the fourth is acceptance, my favorite, because all I need to do is be at peace with the world that's falling down around me. So you need to know the definitions of each one of these, and we'll be using a framework to help capture this concept so that you can use it going forward. This is the risk framework that's used in a variety of fields, not just personal finance. But if you imagine risk is going to land, any type of risky event that can endanger your goals can fall somewhere on this. And on the x-axis, you have impact, on how large of an effect it has. And on the y-axis, you have probability. In some fields, it's referred to as frequency. And so high probability or high frequency and high impact, that has a high effect. And if it very rarely happens and it's only a mild inconvenience, that will be low. So with the 4 ways that we can attack risk, what does it mean? Well, first of all, when we avoid it, we are reducing the probability of it happening. So we are reducing it and it's going down. Means it's less likely to happen. Mitigation means we reduce the impact, which means we're moving it to the left. We say we're moving it from high to medium. And we could always do, both simultaneously. We could pursue mitigation and avoid it. The third approach was transfer. Now transfer means, toss this out altogether and pay someone else to take care of it for you. And so if you have home insurance that covers, say, a fire. Now, if a fire burns down your home, that's a very significant event and a negative financial event as well. Now, what you can do, you can pay an insurance company so that they will rebuild your home for you, let's say, if that event were to occur. And so you're transferring the risk from you to the insurance company, and you're paying them in order to do that. Finally, acceptance is, some people would say, well, this is just being lazy. But I would say you've done the math, and also that you're aware of this and you're willing to accept that risk. I mean, life is full of risks. I mean, we turn left on streets, which is inherently more risky than turning right, yet we still turn left. It still happens. There's a certain level of risk that we're willing to accept in our lives, and that is healthy and normal. That's fine. What would help is think of an example of each of these in your life as far as whatever goals that you have, that you've come up with for your project 1. Come up with different types of risk that could endanger them, as we've discussed previously. But just think of how you could, say, avoid the risk or mitigate risk or transfer it or accept it. And once you come up with palpable examples, this framework becomes quite intuitive, and it becomes very handy to use in a variety of fields and a variety of situations, both in your personal life and your professional life. One story that I like to share about this is that I was going out to my car late one night after a long day, and I get in my car and I notice like, whoa, my car door wasn't locked. And then I get in the car and I'm wondering, where are my SpongeBob seat covers? And then I put my key in the ignition and it has struggles turning all the way. And I'm like, wait a second, this isn't my car. So, granted, I am not someone who's trying to steal. I got out of the car and felt pretty dumb. But by locking our car doors, that is something that is a step that we can take in order to, say, avoid a risk of, say, our car getting broken into or our car being stolen. It's a very basic example, and if you ever wander into a place and your SpongeBob seat covers are missing, you probably don't belong there. So the field of risk and risk management are actually more straightforward than most people realize. At first, we recognize that risks are events that will endanger our goals. Some people confuse risk with volatility, something that's very uncertain, but they're not necessarily the same thing. As an example, imagine if we play a game and I flip a coin. If it's heads, you get $5, and if it's tails, I give you $100. Well, one person might say, well, this is very risky because there's a large range of options that could occur, but it's a win-win scenario for you. It's not risky at all. And so in different fields, they use this term risk slightly differently, and it's just something to be aware of. Second, we understand that risk management allows us to increase our chances of achieving those goals that we have, even if the event occurs. And so we can say mitigate the risk, we can reduce the probability of the risk happening, we can transfer that risk to someone else, or, accept it. And so these are the fundamentals of risk. One inherent aspect of risk is it has to be something that we don't know. So in the vernacular within risk, they talk about known unknowns. There are certain things that you know, but you don't know if it's going to happen or not. And so if you know that, like, for example, I will not play in the NBA, that is known. It is not a risk. I do not have that skill, and it is not going to happen. That's not a risk. That's just a fact. That is the way it is. So a risk needs to be inherently an unknown in some dimension. Now, a difference between known unknowns, things that you know but may happen or may not happen, there are certain things that you haven't even considered which could still endanger your goals. And it's like, wow, I didn't even think of all of these bad things that could happen. Well, the response isn't to just mill around and think of all the terrible things that could happen in your life. On the positive side, within risk management, if you take these steps within risk management frequently, you tend to address these unknown unknowns unknowingly. Or rather, there are these things that you never considered, but by taking these steps within risk mitigation, say, is that you've reduced the impact of risks that you are aware of, in addition to risks that you weren't even aware of at the time. So that's a general overview for how risk and risk management operates, kind of at the definition level, as well as the framework around it and how it relates to our goals. Now we're getting to this point with money. Okay, we've discussed goals. What does that have to do with money? Hopefully nothing, because the majority of Americans can't pass a financial literacy test. See in the links below for articles relating to that. And a large portion of Americans have no savings whatsoever, where about half have $800 or fewer in order to cover an emergency spending situation. So what do my goals have to do with money? Unfortunately, the answer is a lot, but that is why we need to take a proactive approach using risk management in order to be prepared for these situations. In order to apply that concept, let's discuss your project that you've been working on. So what are some of your goals? That's what you've been thinking through. And you're also assigned to think through how money issues could interfere with you achieving your goals. So what I recommend doing is that pull out a piece of paper, and you could list out some of your goals on the left-hand side, and you could write out on the right-hand side different ways that finances could actually get in the way of you achieving your goals. At one point in my life, I was at a crossroads, And I had this two opportunities in front of me. And because of financial prudence, and because I was able to pay off, say, student loans and some other obligations that I had, I was able to take a path that I otherwise would not have been able to take. It basically is creating more opportunities and more options for me because that's what was aligning with my goals. It was aligning that personal finance strategy with my overall goals. To help you with this activity, I've included the Spent game, a link to it below. This gives you at least a glimpse of what it's like as far as when things kind of come crashing down financially. When you find yourself in a really, really tough situation, it can feel suffocating. And in these types of situations, generally you need to take pretty drastic action, but it's super hard to do in order to just think straight. It's hard to get your resources in order and to kind of make that decision because it feels like everything's pressing in around you. So go through that game and see if it gives you a few ideas of how finances could potentially interfere with your goals.